Hello, I'm Ben, and today we'll be chatting with Federico Tondi. So Federico is a data and innovation expert. He's worked with a wide variety of companies in corporate innovation setups. So Federico, could you tell us a bit more about your work and what is it that you do?
Yes, sure. So data and innovation is obviously a very big and wide space. I've been involved with corporate IT transformation programs for many years. I won't say how many, otherwise you'll know how old I am. But I've always had this passion for basically understanding what's behind processes and systems in big companies and how it's possible to drive innovation through using data, understanding data, and sharing data across different areas of the enterprise, and obviously across multiple enterprises, multiple entities that work together within an industry. So yeah, in essence, my let's say big passion is for data as let's say the main driver of this, and equally of connectivity that is obviously the secret sauce of how it's possible to get value out of data by sharing in two ways, right, between companies that work in the same industries.
When you talk about corporate and data and innovation, what's so particular about the way those companies work?
Yeah, so it's a very good question, actually, especially in today's world where digital is very much oriented to B2C, so to the consumer world. It's difficult to relate to how big corporations work and why data are so important in the enterprise environment. Basically, the big difference is that in a B2C world, most data get actually generated by users that access digital applications, while in the enterprise world, so in a more, let's say, business-to-business framework, data become more important as part of the ecosystem. So data that already exists become the actual driver of innovation. In essence, the value is already in the data that the company has, as opposed to the amount of data that is generated by consumers that access certain applications. So in this context, the ability to basically find the data where they are across an enterprise landscape and connect them, harmonize them, relate them to different applications, different use cases, but that ultimately belong to the same set of objects, is critical to make a good use of this data. That's why data architecture is in fact very important in the enterprise world, probably more than in the startup world, if it makes sense. It becomes, the more complex an organization is, the more critical a good data architecture becomes.
Having worked myself with several large companies, I often see the same pattern where a lot of data is locked within quite obsolete and quite old architectures and infrastructures.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other aspect, right? So as I said, the first problem in an enterprise world is to actually find the data, because there for sure most of what digital applications need to be powered with can be available in the existing landscape. However, it is very difficult to find this data across all the different applications, and once we find them, it's very difficult to use this data because generally they are hidden in some very maybe old technology platforms. They are restricted by security issues or technical, let's say, gateways that do not allow to access, to exchange data, to use modern data engineering technologies to access this data.
When you talk about security, what are some of the procedures that companies set up in order to make sure that the data are secure?
Well, there are two different aspects, right? So there's security is a very interesting space because everybody talks about it these days. Everybody wants data to be protected, in order to avoid the leakage of a potential competitive advantage to other companies. Plus, a lot comes up with respect to privacy issues as well. So on one side, companies put in place some mechanisms that they can showcase as their security frameworks, which means obviously you go from the very basic type of encryption or very basic control frameworks that are in fact a sort of checklist of what it means to keep data secured. However, the big experience that I have, especially the last 12 months, gave me a big insight on this. The reality is very different. So what companies do often is to show security rather than implement security. So they create very complicated admin processes that often end up being, as I said, pure admin checklists that do not necessarily employ the right level of real technical security. So often companies end up putting in place a very articulated security framework that works on paper, that is very good as a checklist of items, but they do not employ the right security measures to keep the data and everything that comes with the data properly secured. I think that this is pretty much in line with a very long history of sort of evolution of systems and technology within big enterprise, the big enterprise world, where security was not embedded in the design of the application, but it was always added on top as an element to an application. And in that case, and that's the reason why actually often the older the application, the lower the actual level of security.
So it's often the problem of security being an afterthought when building.
Absolutely. I have to say, we have seen waves of of regulations that in times try to embed security more and more in the design aspect of applications. I will say for Europe, GDPR has been one of the more successful ones. However, the only reason why it's successful is because there's a very high monetary aspect of missing GDPR compliance. And so, because basically companies are afraid to lose money and get fined, then they put more effort into it. I don't know if that will reflect in a true security by design kind of mindset later on, though.
Yeah, and I like to think also when you talk about innovation, a lot of it is around sort of breaking fast and running very quick and lean iterative processes.
Yes.
I guess a lot of those don't marry really well with the more rigid security measures set in place by larger corporations.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And in fact, there are two aspects probably to this point. One aspect is related to security with respect to asset integrity. And the other aspect is related to security with respect to actual usage of data. So as I said, competitive leakage. The first aspect is what I generally experience as the more critical one, because it restricts the ability to operate with modern technology. In essence, I guess it's also because of the old system architectures where operational databases were in fact the one and only kind of source of truth, where every piece of data needs to be taken out if we want to do anything with it that is not just transact. Now, the access to these databases obviously has to be restricted because if anything happens, your system of records crashes, right? So in time, other sort of parallel databases and data spaces have been added. I can think of examples where companies like SAP, for instance, introduced through in-memory analytics databases like HANA, in order to have a different area with the same availability of data that can be used for their business intelligence or, I mean, as I said, for any other kind of analytics. However, it doesn't actually move the issue, it doesn't solve the issue, just move it from one area to another, because then the two systems, the system of record and the analytic database, are still connected. So the access to the analytic databases has to pretty much reflect the same level of governance as the main database. So in fact, you're just shifting downward the same problem and end up applying the same type of rigid approach to another space.
So rather than fixing the problem, it actually duplicates it.
Absolutely. And that makes it even harder then, because then you have two systems to keep aligned between themselves. And then basically your access to one of these two systems is again subject to the way you stay aligned to that system. So the ability to use either proper pipelines of data streaming using modern technologies, or other data exchange protocols through, for instance, APIs. So it's becoming very complicated to keep things running in the right way.
Okay.
That's how analytics often gets analytics initiatives get to to slow down massively when interacting with these big data sources from the corporate landscape.
Okay, so when you try to innovate in this context,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the key difficulties you're going to face in terms of accessing data, I imagine, but also in terms of setting up all the systems in order to keep in sync with the main data?
There is one added complication with respect to using data from the enterprise world, and that's basically the ability to understand the business context of this data. Basically, the life of the enterprise reflects how the systems are designed, and the way the systems are designed reflects also in the way master records are built and transactional data are generated. So even before starting to access the data, it is critical to understand how the enterprise works, understand why customers have certain characteristics, why transactions are booked, are basically posted, recorded in a certain way, what kind of insights are recorded through transactional data as well. So the first complication, I would say, is not even technical, but it's more sort of functional and really like business related. The first complication and the first paramount objective is for anyone that wants to use data to understand the business context. And as a secondary, obviously equally important, but as a second step is to understand how the specific applications that hold the data that are required can be accessed through different tools or different protocols. So there is no straight answer. To innovate, as you're asking, the first point is understanding the context, and second, being very open to trial and error. Really, trial and error meaning sometimes going a bit away from the usual data engineer or data scientist approach of having access to all data so that the initial screening can be done and the first understanding of data can surface. I think in a corporate complex enterprise world, even a small subset of data can allow to understand structures, can allow to understand how business works to build and to generate this data, and that based on that and based on the understanding of the underlying systems, then the right tools can be experimented. Obviously, there's a degree of functionalities that need to be verified, but often it's also a matter of how certain applications can be connected to the enterprise landscape, and therefore they comply to security or they allow to work through, for instance, VPN, so the connection is secure and things like that. So yeah, it's very complicated, I have to say.
Yeah, and so you actually, I mean, you alluded to kind of people and talent, because I imagine that getting people who have both this domain understanding, but also the technical capability to navigate through the technical landscape of a company. I guess this is kind of a very key, a very particular type of skill that you need for this.
And we always talk about unicorns, right? When we talk about talents and we search for the perfect blend of skills and not just. I think it's a perfect blend of mindset as well, as you say. So let's say where I'm coming from is it's always easier to teach someone or to coach someone on tools, right? I mean, you can probably these days you can learn Python on YouTube, yeah, and probably be pretty good at that in a very short amount of time. However, the time that it takes to someone to enter the mindset that is required to have a very broad view over an enterprise landscape, it takes much longer. Especially, I noticed that there is a very sort of common resistance from especially the younger talents and the more, let's say, more innovative talents in approaching the enterprise world, as they feel like it's hard to have the same level of freedom to operate, according to, their own way of working, right?
Yeah. To that, I would say, so as somebody who comes from a more startup type of background, it's very difficult when facing those massive processes and architectures to marry this with the lean product development ways of working and agile methodologies as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's in something like data and innovation. Really, there's I feel there's a lot of influencing work that needs to go in from a leader. Let's say, yeah, the influencing goes two ways. The influencing goes to, on one side, to the stakeholders within the organization that need to be open-minded, that need to be allow the right level of freedom to the teams and to the talents, so that they can operate with the latest technology and frameworks and approaches, etc. At the same time, the influencing goes to the talents themselves, where having tens of years of history behind for a company is not a bad thing. An enterprise has become an enterprise being a startup. Yeah, back in the days, at some point, every company was a startup, right?
Yeah.
It's just a matter of how the evolution goes. And I'm pretty sure that even companies like I don't know, say Facebook or Google or Amazon, in their own way, they have a corporate governance, they have structure. It's just that it is very different for companies that are digital native. The way their architecture grows is, in fact, a digital architecture in itself. The more complex exercise is really when a traditional enterprise is slowly moving towards the tech world and slowly moving towards a more digital, let's say, framework. And that's where, there is the balance. Obviously, there's also big difference in value of the transactions, right? In value of the work. Startup is great as something that is going to be up and coming one day. Enterprise is great because it allows you to work within a framework that operates often with a very high dollar value, that where the impact can be seen straight away on the bottom line when something goes well or not. So there's different aspects, and I think everybody has to adapt.
Yeah. So I've seen a lot of companies going through those digital transformation programs, trying to really change the way they work and trying to adapt all those new ways of working to update their processes and to become more competitive, especially from the digital perspective. And all of this is ultimately to fuel their innovation and to allow them to develop additional competitive edges. How do you, I mean, so how do you see the COVID-19 and kind of the current crisis that we have? How do you see it impacting those efforts from all those different companies? Do you see a lot of them actually scaling back on those efforts, or do you think that companies should on the opposite side of things, try to push through it and try to go through the pain?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. So so obviously, again, there are a few different aspects with COVID-19. I guess the real issue with it, and we obviously don't touch on the human aspect. That is terrible, but sadly, there's not much we can do for that. But from an organization perspective, the real difficult part of it is the uncertainty of the when. Probably there is no compared to any crisis of the past. Probably there is no model that can really allow to forecast when things are going to move again and how things will move again, especially with respect to the ability of interact on in a human way, right? In a direct sort of face-to-face fashion. So obviously, technology is definitely the space where we are lucky in this sense, because we can do technology, we can do innovation without being all in the same place, like you and me right now. We would probably have this chat, in your beautiful office there or somewhere outside in the sun, and instead you can do the same. We can do the same thing, through a piece of technology. So for sure, what I will see critical for organization right now is the ability to accelerate their digital journey in this phase. There are surely things that cannot be done, but there's a lot that can be achieved by looking at one's own shop and get it in order to be the first off the blocks when things start moving again. clearly there is a lot of pressure on costs right now, on investment in general. So every company, to be honest, has has to balance the spending and the preservation of the workforce in this context, and the ability of to keep let's say the survival mode on for as much and as long as it's going to be required. However, it's probably exactly in moments like this that innovative companies or innovative mindset can really allow to, as I said, be ready for what's going to come next and be ready at the forefront of the queue and the first of the blocks. So definitely a moment not to go into big investments, probably. However, a moment to reflect and maybe set the right strategy and start preparing and working towards that strategy.
So talking about risk and talking about those new innovation that you're mentioning right now.
Yes.
So do you think companies will tend to go towards more risk adverse kind of products? And how do you think it's going to impact this data innovation element?
Yeah, that's again there is one element of complexity with an enterprise and technology innovation in general. Often it requires an element of hardware innovation as well, or an element of introduction of the innovation in physical locations. Think about I don't know, traceability platforms through the supply chain, as an example, right? So they require investment in hardware that actually allows to, I don't know, label a package or scan a package, or things like that, where the digital investment is not going to do anything unless the hardware, so the physical investment, comes into the picture as well.
Right. Yeah.
So obviously, these type of scenarios makes difficult to go towards a heavily innovative approach, because, as we say, the current climate doesn't allow to scale the physical investment. As an example, doesn't allow to go and install new machineries in warehouses, or doesn't allow to get the supply of hardware in the same timely fashion that would have been before, and so on and so forth. So I think I think companies should look at the investments that they can sustain without having to add unsustainable ones. So as an example, where digital can be pursued by digital only, then obviously there's no impact from the current climate. And maybe those are the areas where it will be easier also to identify pockets of change and pockets of value, because they can be in a way realized more quickly.
Yeah, and probably I'd say refocusing a company's resources towards tackling those data issues, towards, for instance, modernizing the data frameworks, the processes, and even the governance around security and all those potential difficulties. That's probably the best the company can do right now, when all marketing effort end up kind of being nullified because of the bad economy right now.
Yeah, I mean, I see, in the little escapade that I do every day to walk around my block and get some fresh air, I see, the clever shop owners, they are actually renovating their own shops these days, right? Because they have to be closed, and therefore they are not in business. So what's better time to just give a refresh to their shop, and maybe, get the shop all in order for, a grand opening whenever they're gonna be able to. So I guess the wise company or the wise leaders should do something similar to their own internal frameworks. As we said, we know data are going to be, the critical success factor in the next decade and maybe forever, until the next sort of big change in technology.
Yeah.
So, what's a better time than this to try and say, modernize some of the procedures, or simply, understand where the shortcomings are, right? Where the blockers are, where bottlenecks, where things can be improved. And sometimes, especially in the enterprise world, there are so many low-hanging fruits that there's a lot that can be done without, breaking the bank or simply without making a revolution. As I always say, it's the evolution that counts in the enterprise world. We cannot just throw everything away and start all over, right? But there are many ways to do what it needs to be done in a way that is also be acceptable for the enterprise.
That's going to be the end of our time. Thanks a lot, Federico.
Thank you, Ben. It was a great pleasure, really. And
it was a very nice chat.
Hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you. Likewise.
All right.